Hello everyone, I am very glad that you're joining this story. Subscribe, like and comment. Enjoy the story, smile more often.
Tom sat in the small, cluttered kitchen of his modest home, staring at the faded linoleum countertop. His cup of coffee, untouched and cold, sat next to a stack of overdue bills. The faint hum of the refrigerator was the only sound in the room until his phone rang, shattering the silence. He glanced at the screen and froze. Logan. The name sent a mix of emotions rushing through him. Hope, dread, guilt. They hadn't spoken in weeks, not since their last argument, which had ended with Logan slamming down the phone. Tom hesitated before picking up. "Hello," he said, his voice tentative. For a moment, there was only silence on the other end. Then Logan's voice came through, sharp and accusatory. "Why did you do it, Dad?" Tom's heart sank. He didn't need to ask what Logan meant. He knew. "Logan," Tom began, trying to keep his tone steady. "Can we talk about this?" "Talk about what?" Logan interrupted, his voice cracking with emotion. "How you ruined my future. How you crushed everything I ever worked for. What's left to talk about?" Tom closed his eyes, the guilt hitting him like a tidal wave. "I was doing the best I could," he said softly. "Your best?" Logan's laugh was bitter and hollow. "Your best wasn't good enough. Do you have any idea what you cost me? How many scouts wanted to see me play? How close I was to getting a scholarship? And you couldn't even come up with the money for one lousy tournament." Tom gripped the edge of the countertop, his knuckles turning white. He wanted to explain, to tell Logan about the nights he'd spent lying awake, wondering how to make ends meet. About the humiliation of asking for advances at work or borrowing money from friends. About the impossible choice he'd faced between keeping food on the table and supporting Logan's basketball dream. But none of that would matter to Logan. Not now. "It wasn't that simple," Tom said, his voice trembling. "It was simple to me," Logan shot back. "I was good, better than good. I could have made it. And now? Now I'm stuck in a dead-end job, living paycheck to paycheck because you couldn't figure it out." Tom's chest tightened. He didn't recognize the man on the other end of the line, the bitterness, the resentment. This wasn't the same Logan who used to shoot hoops in the driveway until sunset, his face lit up with dreams of making it big. "Logan, I'm sorry," Tom said quietly. "I never wanted to hold you back. I wanted to give you everything." "Save it," Logan snapped. "I don't want your apologies. I want to know why. Why didn't you try harder? Why didn't you believe in me?" "I did believe in you," Tom said, his voice rising despite himself. "I believe in you so much it broke my heart when I couldn't give you what you needed. Do you think I wanted this? Do you think I wanted to watch you lose your chance?" The words hung in the air, heavy and unspoken for too long. For a moment, Logan didn't respond. When he finally spoke, his voice was cold. "You know what, Dad? It doesn't matter. You made your choice, and now I'm stuck with it." Before Tom could say anything else, the line went dead. The silence in the room was deafening. Tom stared at the phone in his hand, his mind racing with everything he wished he'd said. He wanted to tell Logan about the nights he'd spent driving delivery trucks until dawn, or the weekends he'd skipped meals to make sure there was enough for Logan and his sister. He wanted to tell him that he'd tried. God, he'd tried, but life had a way of throwing punches he couldn't dodge. Instead, Tom set the phone down on the counter and sank into the chair, his head in his hands. The kitchen, with its peeling wallpaper and dim lighting, felt like a cage closing in around him. The memories came flooding back, Logan's high school games, the way the crowd would roar every time he made a three-pointer, the look of pure determination on his face as he practiced late into the night. Tom had believed in Logan more than he'd ever believed in anything. But belief hadn't been enough. As he sat there, Tom couldn't help but wonder if Logan was right. Had he failed him? Could he have done more? The weight of those questions pressed down on him, suffocating and relentless. Somewhere deep inside, though, a small voice pushed back. Life hadn't been kind to either of them, and Tom had done what he thought was best at the time. But would Logan ever understand that? The hum of the refrigerator filled the room again, and Tom stared at the stack of bills on the counter. When do dreams become too heavy a burden? The question lingered, unanswered, as Tom sat alone in the quiet kitchen, wondering if he'd ever find a way to make things right. The sound of basketballs thudding against the gym floor echoed in Tom's memory as he stood at the edge of the court, watching Logan practice. It was his junior year, and Logan was a star in the making. Coaches, teammates, even parents on the bleachers whispered about his potential. "That kid's going places," they'd say, nodding toward Logan as he sank shot after shot with laser precision. Tom couldn't have been prouder, yet a knot of dread always accompanied that pride. It wasn't just about Logan's talent. It was about what came next. Scouts had started showing up at games, sitting quietly in the back rows with clipboards and critical eyes. The stakes were growing higher, and so were the costs. In those days, Logan lived and breathed basketball. He woke up early to run drills before school, spent every afternoon at practice, and every evening shooting hoops in their driveway under the dim glow of the porch light. Tom often sat on the steps, nursing a cold beer, watching Logan chase his dream. The boy's determination was contagious, and for a while, it seemed like nothing could stop him. But for Tom, reality was never far behind. At the time, he was working 2 jobs: early mornings in a warehouse loading trucks and nights bartending at a rundown dive on the edge of town. The hours were brutal, and the pay barely covered the bills. Their small house needed constant repairs: a leaky roof here, a broken water heater there, and Tom's daughter, Emily, was starting college that year. He'd promised her he'd help with tuition, even if it meant maxing out credit cards. The first time Logan brought home a flyer for an out-of-state basketball camp, Tom felt his stomach twist. "This is the one, Dad," Logan had said, his eyes sparkling with excitement. "Coach says all the big scouts go to this camp. If I can get noticed there." Tom forced a smile, trying to match Logan's enthusiasm. "How much does it cost?" he asked, already dreading the answer. $2,000, Logan said, barely pausing before adding, "but it's worth it. I'll pay you back when I go pro." Tom wanted to believe that. God, how he wanted to believe it. But $2,000 was a mountain he couldn't climb. He nodded non-committally, promising to think about it, knowing full well there was no way he could afford it. As the weeks went by, the pressure mounted. Logan was relentless, practicing harder than ever and throwing himself into every game like his life depended on it. He was the heart and soul of the team, leading them to victory after victory. Tom was always in the stands, cheering the loudest, his chest swelling with pride every time Logan's name echoed through the gym. But behind the scenes, the financial strain was taking its toll. The utility bills were overdue, the car needed new brakes, and Emily's tuition payments were looming. Tom worked overtime whenever he could, but it was like trying to bail water from a sinking ship with a teacup. One night, after a particularly grueling shift at the bar, Tom sat at the kitchen table with a stack of bills spread out in front of him. Logan's camp flyer sat on top, mocking him with its bright, optimistic lettering. He rubbed his temples, exhaustion pressing down on him like a heavy blanket. The math didn't add up. It never added up. A few days later, Logan came home from practice with an envelope in his hand. "Coach says this is the registration form for the camp," he said, dropping it on the table. His tone was casual, but his eyes were hopeful. Tom stared at the envelope, his chest tightening. He'd rehearsed this conversation in his head 100 times, but the words still felt like shards of glass in his throat. "Logan," he began carefully, "we need to talk about this camp." Logan's smile faltered. "What about it?" Tom took a deep breath. "I've been looking at the budget, and I just don't see how we can swing it right now, with Emily's tuition and the house repairs. But this is my shot." Logan cut in, his voice rising. "You don't get it, Dad. If I miss this, I might not get another chance." "I know it's important," Tom said, his voice steady but firm. "But I can't pull money out of thin air. I've tried every option, and it's just not possible." Logan stared at him, his face a mixture of disbelief and betrayal. "So that's it? You're giving up on me?" "Logan, I'm not giving up on you," Tom said, his voice cracking. I don't have the means to do this right now." The tension between them was palpable for weeks after that conversation. Logan threw himself into his practices with an almost manic intensity, as if trying to prove something. Tom did his best to be supportive, showing up at every game, cheering louder than anyone else. But the rift between them had already begun to form. Looking back, Tom couldn't pinpoint the exact moment when everything started to unravel. Maybe it was when he said no to the camp. Maybe it was the resentment that had quietly grown in Logan's heart every time he saw another player with better shoes, better gear, better opportunities. All Tom knew was that those years were a whirlwind of pride and guilt, joy and regret. He'd given everything he had to support his son, but somehow it had never been enough. And now, years later, that guilt still haunted him. Tom sat on the worn couch in his living room, staring at the patch of peeling paint on the ceiling. The house was quiet now, too quiet. It used to hum with the sounds of life. Logan dribbling a basketball outside, Emily singing along to whatever pop song was popular that week. But those days felt like a lifetime ago. In the silence, his mind drifted back to the moment that changed everything. It wasn't a dramatic scene, no thunderclap or flashing neon sign to mark the decision. It was just a quiet, desperate choice he'd made at a time when there were no good options. It was the spring of Logan's junior year. He had just led his high school team to the state playoffs, and the buzz around him was undeniable. Logan Walker is a natural, one scout had told the coach after a game. He's got raw talent and the kind of drive you can't teach. With the right exposure, he could go far, but exposure came with a price. That was when the flyer arrived, detailing an elite basketball camp for top-tier players. It wasn't just any camp, it was the camp. The kind of camp where college scouts roamed the sidelines and connections were made that could change the trajectory of a young athlete's career. Logan's coach had pulled Tom aside after practice one evening, practically glowing with excitement. "This is it," the coach said, holding out the flyer like it was a golden ticket. "This camp could open doors for Logan you wouldn't believe. I know the fee's steep, but I've seen parents take out loans for less." Tom had smiled politely, but inside his stomach churned. He thanked the coach and promised to look into it. That night, after the kids had gone to bed, Tom sat at the kitchen table, the flyer spread out next to a stack of bills. His heart sank as he read the cost again. $2,000 for 1 week. That wasn't just steep, it was impossible. He started making calls the next day, hoping for a miracle. He called the camp organizers, asking if they offered scholarships. They didn't. He called his boss at the warehouse, asking if there were any extra shifts available. There weren't. He even considered asking Emily to put off her tuition payments, but the thought of breaking that promise made his chest ache. Tom had been here before, scraping together just enough to cover the bare minimum, making sacrifices that no one else saw. But this was different. The stakes felt higher. It wasn't just about money. It was about Logan's future. For days, Tom tried to find a way. He skipped meals to save money, avoided turning on the heat despite the lingering chill of early spring. But when he ran the numbers, it was clear. Even with all the cutbacks, there was no way to make $2,000 materialize out of thin air. The final blow came when the car broke down. The mechanic's estimate, $500 for repairs, was the nail in the coffin. Without the car, Tom couldn't get to work. Without work, there was no paycheck. And without a paycheck, the family wouldn't survive. Tom still remembered the look on Logan's face when he broke the news. They were sitting in the living room, the basketball camp flyer sitting on the coffee table between them like a loaded gun. Tom had rehearsed what he was going to say, but as he looked at his son, so full of hope, so certain of his future, all the words fell apart. "Logan," he began carefully, "I've been looking at the budget and..." The boy's smile faltered. "You found a way, right?" Tom's chest tightened. "I can't make it work, son. I've tried everything, but there's just no way." The silence that followed was deafening. Logan stared at him, his expression shifting from disbelief to anger. "So, that's it?" Logan said, his voice rising. "You're just giving up? Do you know what this camp means? What it could do for me?" "I do," Tom said, his voice cracking. "But we have bills to pay. Emily's tuition, the car repairs." "Oh, of course. Emily's tuition," Logan snapped, his eyes flashing with resentment. "She gets to go to college, but I don't get a shot at my dream? That's fair." Tom tried to explain, to make Logan understand the impossible position he was in. But the more he talked, the angrier Logan became. In the days that followed, Logan barely spoke to him. He threw himself into practice with a single-minded intensity that bordered on obsession. Tom watched from the sidelines, his heart breaking a little more each time Logan avoided his gaze. The resentment only grew as the months went on. Logan's teammates went to the camp and came back with stories of the scouts they'd met and the connections they'd made. Meanwhile, Logan felt like he was stuck in place, watching his dreams slip further out of reach. For Tom, the guilt was crushing. He replayed the decision over and over in his mind, wondering if there was something, anything, he could have done differently. But no matter how many times he went through it, the math never added up. He had chosen survival over a dream, and it had cost him his son's trust. Years later, that choice still haunted him. And every time Logan's words echoed in his mind, "You're just giving up?" Tom wondered if maybe, just maybe, Logan was right. It had been weeks since their last phone call, but Tom hadn't stopped thinking about it. Logan's accusations replayed in his mind on an endless loop. The anger in his son's voice, the bitterness. It cut deeper than he cared to admit. Still, Tom wasn't expecting the knock on his door late that Saturday afternoon. He opened it to find Logan standing there, his tall frame filling the doorway. His expression was hard, his jaw tight. "Logan," Tom said, surprised. "What are you doing here?" "We need to talk," Logan replied, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. Tom shut the door and turned to face his son. Logan's presence was imposing, his frustration practically radiating off him. Tom could feel the weight of what was about to happen, like the pressure in the air before a storm. Logan didn't waste time. "I can't keep doing this," he said, his voice sharp. "I can't keep pretending everything's fine when it's not. You ruined my life, Dad, and you act like we're just going to move on from that." Tom winced, but held his ground. "I've never acted like that, Logan. I know I let you down. I've told you I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't fix anything." Logan interrupted, his voice rising. "Do you even understand what you took from me? I had one shot, one chance to make it, and you blew it." Tom clenched his fists at his sides, trying to keep calm. "You think I don't know that? You think I don't carry that guilt every single day? I didn't have the money, Logan. I couldn't make it happen, no matter how much I wanted to." Logan's eyes flashed. "There's always a way. Other parents found a way. They took loans, they worked extra jobs, they made it work. But you let out a bitter laugh. You just gave up." Tom's patience snapped. "You think I didn't try? You have no idea what I went through back then, Logan. I was working 2 jobs, barely sleeping, skipping meals to save money. I gave everything I had to keep this family afloat." Logan stepped closer, his voice low but cutting. "And it still wasn't enough, was it? Because you didn't believe in me. That's the truth, isn't it? You didn't think I could make it." Tom stared at him, stunned. "How can you even say that? I believe in you more than I believed in anything. Watching you play was the only thing that kept me going some days. Then why didn't you fight harder?" Logan shot back. "Why didn't you do whatever it took?" "Because I couldn't," Tom yelled, his voice echoing through the small house. "I couldn't do everything, Logan. I had to make choices, and they weren't easy, and they weren't fair, but I did the best I could with what I had." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The room was heavy with the weight of everything they'd been holding back for years. Logan broke the silence first. "You say you did your best, but what about my best? What was the point of all that work, all those late nights, if you were just going to pull the rug out from under me?" Tom's shoulders sagged, the fight draining out of him. "Logan, I didn't want to take anything away from you. I wanted to give you the world. But life doesn't always work out the way we want it to. Sometimes we have to make sacrifices." "Yeah, well, your sacrifices cost me my future," Logan said bitterly. Tom looked at his son, the anger giving way to something softer. "Pain, regret. Do you think this is the future I wanted for you? Do you think I don't lie awake at night wondering if I could have done more? You're not the only one who lost something, Logan. I lost you." Logan flinched, the words landing harder than he expected. For the first time, his expression softened just slightly. "I didn't know how to fix it," Tom continued, his voice quieter now. "Every decision I made back then felt like the wrong one. And when I saw how angry you were, how much you hated me for it, I didn't know how to reach you. I still don't." Logan looked away, his jaw tightening. "It's not that simple, Dad. You can't just say you're sorry and expect everything to be okay." "I know that," Tom said. "But I also know that holding on to this anger isn't helping either of us. I can't change the past, Logan. I wish I could, but I can't. The only thing I can do is try to be here now, if you'll let me." For a moment, Logan didn't respond. The weight of the years they'd spent at odds hung between them, too heavy to lift in one conversation. "I don't know if I can forgive you," Logan said finally, his voice quiet but firm. Tom nodded, his throat tight. "I understand, but I hope someday you'll try." Logan didn't answer. He turned and walked toward the door, pausing with his hand on the knob. "For what it's worth, I wish things had been different too." And with that, he was gone, leaving Tom alone in the quiet house once more. As the door closed, Tom sank onto the couch, the weight of the confrontation pressing down on him. He'd said his piece, but the wounds between them ran deep. Whether they could ever heal was a question only time could answer. For Logan, basketball wasn't just a sport, it was his identity. Ever since he first picked up a ball at 7 years old, he knew he was destined to play. The court was where everything made sense. It was where he felt strong, confident, and unstoppable. By the time he reached high school, he was already being called a prodigy. His coach used words like exceptional and 1 in a million. Logan didn't just play basketball. He lived it. Every spare moment was spent practicing his shot, improving his dribble, or studying game footage. He wasn't just chasing a dream, he was building one. At first, his dad was his biggest fan. Tom never missed a game, cheering so loudly from the bleachers that Logan sometimes rolled his eyes. But deep down, he loved it. It made him feel like his dad believed in him, like they were in this together. That belief, though, began to crack during his junior year. Logan's talent had earned him a reputation, and with that came attention. College scouts started showing up at games, taking notes, and nodding approvingly. His coach pulled him aside after practice one day to say he was on the radar of a few Division I programs. "You keep this up, Logan, and you'll have your pick of scholarships," the coach said, clapping him on the shoulder. Logan went home that night feeling invincible. When he told his dad, Tom looked proud, but there was a hesitation Logan didn't understand. "That's great, son," Tom had said, forcing a smile. But there was something else behind his eyes. Worry, maybe? That worry turned into a wall when the flyer for the elite basketball camp arrived. Logan knew this was his chance to prove himself to the top scouts. His teammates who had attended before came back with stories of meeting legendary coaches and players. The camp wasn't just an opportunity, it was a gateway. But when he handed the flyer to his dad, Logan saw that same hesitation again. At first, Logan was hopeful. His dad had always supported him, so why would this be any different? But as the weeks went on, it became clear that Tom wasn't making plans to send him. The excuses started piling up. Money was tight, the car needed repairs, Emily's college tuition was due. Logan tried to stay patient. He knew they didn't have a lot of money, but this was his future. Couldn't his dad see that? The night Tom told him they couldn't afford the camp, something inside Logan cracked. "I thought you believed in me," Logan had said, his voice shaking with anger and hurt. "I do," Tom had replied, his voice heavy with guilt. "But I have to think about the whole family, Logan. It's not just about you." Those words stung like a slap. Logan had poured his heart and soul into basketball, sacrificed so much to chase this dream, and his own father couldn't find a way to make it happen. From that moment on, resentment began to grow. Logan tried to channel his anger into basketball. He practiced harder, pushed himself further, determined to prove that he didn't need the camp to make it. But the truth was, he felt like he was already falling behind. His teammates who went to the camp came back stronger, more confident. Scouts started focusing on them instead of him. Every time Logan stepped onto the court, he felt the pressure mounting. He couldn't afford to have an off game or make a single mistake. The weight of his missed opportunity was crushing, and it was all he could think about. The resentment toward his dad only deepened as time went on. Logan began to see every struggle he faced as a direct result of Tom's failure to support him. When he didn't get a scholarship, Logan wasn't surprised, but he was devastated. He watched his teammates sign their letters of intent, posting photos in their college gear, while he was left wondering if he'd even get to play at the next level. Logan spent the next few years trying to claw his way back. He played at a community college for a year, hoping to transfer to a bigger program, but the scouts didn't come. He tried attending open tryouts for semi-pro teams, but nothing panned out. Every setback felt like confirmation of what he already believed. His dad had failed him. But there was another part of Logan's story, one he didn't like to admit, even to himself. Deep down, he wondered if he'd failed too. What if he hadn't worked hard enough? What if he just wasn't good enough? Blaming his dad was easier than facing those questions. It gave him someone to direct his anger toward, someone to hold accountable for everything that had gone wrong. Still, the anger came at a cost. The relationship he once had with his dad, the one where they bonded over basketball, where his dad cheered for him at every game, was gone. Logan didn't know if it could ever be repaired, and part of him wasn't sure he wanted it to be. As Logan sat in his small apartment, staring at an old basketball trophy from his high school days, he felt the familiar ache of regret and anger. The dream that had once burned so brightly felt like a distant memory now, smothered by the weight of missed opportunities and unspoken words. Why couldn't he just believe in me? Logan muttered to himself. But even as he said it, a small voice in the back of his mind asked a question he didn't want to answer. Had he believed in himself enough? The thought lingered, unsettling and uncomfortable, as Logan turned out the light and tried to push the memories away. Tom wasn't expecting company that Sunday afternoon. He was in his garage, sorting through a pile of old tools, when he heard a car door slam in the driveway. Wiping his hands on a rag, he stepped outside and saw Mark, his oldest friend, leaning against his truck. "Mark!" Tom called out, confused. "What are you doing here?" Mark pushed off the truck and walked toward him, a serious expression on his weathered face. "I came because someone needs to knock some sense into you and Logan before you both destroy what's left of your relationship." Tom sighed, already feeling the weight of the conversation that was about to unfold. "Mark, I appreciate the concern, but this isn't your fight." "It's not about a fight, Tom," Mark said firmly. "It's about fixing something that's broken before it's too late." Reluctantly, Tom invited Mark inside. They sat at the kitchen table, the same table where so many arguments with Logan had taken place. Mark leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "I talked to Logan yesterday," Mark began. "The kid's angry. Hell, he's furious, but underneath all that anger, he's hurt. He feels like you didn't believe in him, Tom. Tom's jaw tightened. I did believe in him. I believed in him more than anything. But believing in him didn't magically make $2,000 appear in my bank account. Mark raised a hand, urging him to stay calm. I know that. And deep down, Logan probably knows that too. But logic doesn't always matter when emotions are involved. To him, it wasn't just about the money. It was about what the money represented. What do you mean? Tom asked, leaning forward. It represented your faith in him, Mark said. Your willingness to sacrifice for his dream. Whether it's fair or not, that's how he sees it. Tom rubbed his temples, frustration bubbling to the surface. Do you think I didn't sacrifice? I worked myself to the bone for that kid, for both my kids. I did everything I could, and it still wasn't enough. Mark nodded slowly. I get it, Tom. I really do. But have you ever actually told Logan that? Not in the middle of an argument, but calmly, honestly? Tom frowned, realizing he hadn't. Every conversation with Logan seemed to spiral into shouting and accusations. The guilt he carried often made him defensive, and that defensiveness only pushed Logan further away. I've tried, Tom said, his voice quieter now. But it's like he doesn't want to hear it. Mark leaned forward, his tone firm. Maybe he doesn't want to hear it because he doesn't feel heard. You're both so stuck in your own pain that neither of you is listening to the other. Tom sat back, the words hitting him harder than he expected. Here's the thing, Mark continued. Logan told me something yesterday that stuck with me. He said he felt invisible growing up, like his dreams didn't matter as much as keeping the lights on or paying for Emily's college. He said it felt like he was always second place in your priorities. That's not true, Tom protested. I loved both my kids equally. I had to make tough choices. I know that, Mark said, his voice gentle now. But Logan doesn't. Or if he does, he's never really felt it. You got to find a way to show him, Tom. And what about him? Tom shot back. I've tried to explain my side, but he doesn't care. He just blames me for everything that went wrong in his life. Mark sighed. Logan's carrying a lot of resentment, and yes, some of it might be misplaced. But he's also dealing with the grief of a dream that didn't come true. That's not easy to let go of, especially when you feel like someone else is to blame. The conversation hung in the air for a moment, heavy with unspoken truths. Finally, Mark leaned forward, his voice quiet but firm. Tom, I'm not saying you're entirely to blame, and I'm not saying Logan is either. But if you two keep pointing fingers at each other, you'll lose whatever chance you have of fixing this. You got to meet him halfway. Tom stared at the table, the weight of Mark's words sinking in. He thought about all the nights he'd lain awake, replaying every decision he'd made, wondering if he could have done something differently. And he thought about Logan, so full of potential, so full of anger. Do you really think it's not too late? Tom asked quietly. Mark's expression softened. It's never too late, Tom, but it's not going to be easy. You've got to be willing to listen, even when it hurts. And you've got to be willing to let him see your vulnerability. Tom nodded slowly, the resolve building within him. He wasn't sure how to start, but he knew he had to try. He owed it to himself, and more importantly, he owed it to Logan. Thanks, Mark, Tom said, his voice steady. Mark smiled, clapping him on the shoulder. You're a good man, Tom. You just need to remind your son of that. As Mark left, Tom sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at the phone. He knew the next call he made would be one of the hardest, but it was a step he had to take. For the first time in years, he felt a sliver of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could find their way back to each other. The call to Logan had been brief and awkward. Tom had stumbled over his words, trying to find the right balance between invitation and apology. Logan's response was guarded, but he agreed to meet. They chose neutral ground, a small park near Logan's apartment where they could talk without the pressure of sitting across from each other in a confined space. Tom arrived first, pacing near a bench under a sprawling oak tree. He clutched 2 cups of coffee, one for himself and one for Logan, unsure if the gesture would even be appreciated. His mind raced with everything he wanted to say, but when Logan finally arrived, all those thoughts scattered. Hey, Logan said, his tone flat as he approached. Hey, Tom replied, holding out the coffee. I wasn't sure what you'd want, so I got black. Logan took the cup without a word and sat down on the bench. Tom hesitated before sitting next to him, leaving enough space between them to avoid making things feel claustrophobic. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The park was quiet, save for the distant sounds of children playing on the swings. Tom finally broke the silence. Thanks for meeting me, he said, his voice tentative. Logan shrugged, staring straight ahead. Figured it was about time. Tom nodded, unsure how to proceed. He hadn't prepared a speech, He learned long ago that rehearsed words always fell flat when emotions ran high. Instead, he decided to start with the truth. "Logan, I know I've said this before, but I'm sorry," Tom began. "I'm sorry for not being the father you needed when it mattered most. I know I let you down." Logan's jaw tightened, but he didn't look at his father. "You've said that before," he muttered. "I know," Tom said, his voice heavy with regret. "But I don't think I've ever really explained it. Back then, I felt like I was drowning, trying to keep everything together. You and Emily were my world, and I wanted to give you both everything, but I couldn't. And that failure has haunted me every day since." Logan finally turned to look at him, his eyes filled with a mixture of anger and hurt. "Do you have any idea what it felt like, Dad? Watching my teammates go to that camp, knowing it could have been me? Knowing that I had the talent, but not the chance to prove it." "I do," Tom said quietly. "And I hated myself for it. But Logan, it wasn't because I didn't believe in you. I believe in you more than I've ever believed in anything. I didn't have the means to back up that belief." Logan shook his head, his voice rising. "You could have found a way. Other parents did. They took out loans, they made sacrifices, they did whatever it took." Tom's shoulders slumped. "And you think I didn't? I worked 2 jobs, Logan. I skipped meals, let bills pile up, and pushed my body to the breaking point just to keep the lights on. If there had been a way, I would have taken it. But there wasn't. I had to make choices, and those choices tore me apart." The intensity of Tom's words gave Logan pause. He shifted uncomfortably, as if unsure how to process his father's vulnerability. "I never saw any of that," Logan admitted after a long silence. "All I saw was the result, that I didn't get my shot. It felt like you didn't care." Tom's voice softened. "I cared, Logan, more than you'll ever know. But I understand why it felt that way. I failed to show you how much I was struggling, and that's on me. I thought I was protecting you by keeping the weight off your shoulders, but maybe I should have let you see the whole picture." Logan ran a hand through his hair, frustration etched into his face. "I guess I didn't think about what you were going through. I was so focused on my dream that I didn't realize how much pressure you were under." Tom offered a faint smile. "We were both carrying a lot, weren't we?" Logan nodded slowly, his anger beginning to thaw. "Yeah, I guess we were." For the first time in years, they began to talk, not about basketball or the past, but about life. Logan shared how he'd struggled after high school, how every rejection felt like a reminder of what he'd lost. Tom listened, his heart aching for the pain his son had carried alone. In turn, Tom shared the guilt that had weighed on him since that fateful decision, how it had shaped every choice he'd made since. They didn't solve everything. Years of resentment couldn't be erased in one conversation. But they started to understand each other in a way they hadn't before. As the sun began to set, Logan stood, clutching his empty coffee cup. "I'm not saying everything's okay," he said, meeting his father's gaze. "But maybe it doesn't have to be. Maybe we just try to move forward." Tom stood as well, a small spark of hope flickering in his chest. "I like that, Logan. I really would." They walked away from the park together, not as father and son, trying to fix the past, but as 2 people willing to try. It wasn't a perfect ending, but it was a beginning, and sometimes that was enough. The call came late in the evening. Tom had just settled into his recliner with a book when his phone buzzed on the coffee table. He glanced at the screen and saw an unfamiliar number. Frowning, he picked it up. "Hello, Mr. Walker?" A woman's voice, calm but professional. "Yes, this is Tom. This is Mercy General Hospital. Your son, Logan, has been admitted. He was in an accident." Tom's stomach dropped. The phone nearly slipped from his hand. "An accident? Is he?" "He's stable, but you should come down as soon as you can," the woman interrupted gently. The words blurred together as Tom scrambled to grab his coat and keys. All he could think about was getting to the hospital and seeing Logan. The drive felt like it took an eternity, though in reality, the hospital was only 20 minutes away. As Tom walked through the sterile hallways, his heart pounded in his chest. The smell of antiseptic and the hum of fluorescent lights made the moment feel surreal. When he finally reached Logan's room, he paused outside the door, trying to steady himself. Taking a deep breath, he stepped inside. Logan was lying in the hospital bed, his face pale and a bandage wrapped around his forehead. His left arm was in a sling, and there were faint bruises on his cheek. Despite his injuries, Logan's eyes were open, though heavy with exhaustion. "Dad?" Logan croaked, his voice barely above a whisper. Tom crossed the room quickly, his chair scraping the floor as he pulled it closer to Logan's bedside. "I'm here, son," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "What happened?" Logan managed a weak smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Car accident. Some guy ran a red light. Guess I wasn't paying enough attention. Tom swallowed hard, his chest tightening. You scared the hell out of me, Logan. For a while, they sat in silence, the beeping of the heart monitor filling the room. Tom kept his eyes on Logan, as though looking away might somehow make him disappear. You didn't have to come, Logan said finally, his tone more subdued than Tom had ever heard it. Of course I did, Tom said firmly. You're my son. Nothing will ever change that. Logan looked away, his jaw tightening. I've been such an ass to you. Tom hesitated, then reached out to place a hand on Logan's good arm. We've both made mistakes, Logan. But you being here right now, it puts a lot into perspective. None of that stuff we've been fighting about matters if something happens to you. Logan's eyes glistened as he turned back to his father. I felt like you didn't care about my dreams. Like I was never enough. Tom shook his head, his voice breaking. Logan, you were more than enough. You always have been. And if I didn't show you that, then that's my failure, not yours. The vulnerability in Tom's voice cut through Logan's defenses in a way nothing else had. I've been holding on to so much anger, Logan admitted, his voice trembling. But the truth is, I don't even know what I'm angry at anymore. You, myself, the universe, it's all just a mess. Tom squeezed Logan's arm gently. Life can be messy, son, and it's okay to feel that way. But we can't let the mess keep us from moving forward. Logan nodded slowly, his gaze dropping to the hospital blanket. I don't want to keep doing this, Dad. I don't want us to hate each other anymore. Tom smiled faintly, relief washing over him. Neither do I. For the first time in years, it felt like they were on the same page, not entirely healed but willing to try. A doctor entered the room, interrupting the moment. He explained Logan's injuries in detail, a mild concussion, a fractured collarbone, and some bruised ribs. He's lucky, the doctor said. It could have been much worse. Those words echoed in Tom's mind as he drove home later that night. The thought of losing Logan had shaken him to his core. The next morning, Tom returned to the hospital with a cup of Logan's favorite coffee and a notebook. What's this? Logan asked, raising an eyebrow. It's for you, Tom said, setting the notebook on the bedside table. I thought maybe you could write down your thoughts. About everything. The anger, the dreams, the regrets. Get it all out of your head. Logan hesitated, then picked up the notebook. Thanks, Dad. As the days passed, Logan began to heal, not just physically, but emotionally. He wrote in the notebook almost daily, sometimes sharing snippets with Tom. They talked more openly than they ever had before, unpacking years of resentment and misunderstandings. For the first time, they weren't just father and son. They were two people trying to understand each other, flaws and all. The accident had been a wake-up call for both of them. It wasn't the kind of event either of them would have chosen, but it had forced them to confront the fragility of life and the importance of their relationship. As Logan prepared for his discharge, Tom felt a glimmer of hope. They still had a long way to go, but for the first time, it felt like they were walking that road together. Tom sat at the small desk in his bedroom, staring at the blank sheet of paper in front of him. The desk lamp cast a pool of light onto the page, and the soft hum of crickets outside the window filled the otherwise silent room. Writing the letter had been Mark's suggestion. Sometimes it's easier to get the words out when you're not face-to-face, his friend had said. Just be honest, Tom. Say what's in your heart. But honesty was hard when the weight of decades of mistakes pressed down on you. Tom sighed, picked up the pen, and began to write. Dear Logan, I've been sitting here for a long time, trying to figure out how to start this letter. I want to get this right because I know how much I've gotten wrong. So let me start by saying the one thing I don't think I've said enough. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for not being the father you needed me to be. I'm sorry for the pain I caused, for the times I wasn't there when you needed me, and for the choices that made you feel like you didn't matter. I wish I could go back and fix it all, but life doesn't give us that option. What I can do is tell you the truth. The truth about why I made the decisions I made and how much they've weighed on me ever since. Tom paused, staring at the words. They didn't feel like enough, but he pressed on. You've always been extraordinary, Logan. From the moment you picked up a basketball, I knew you were different. You had a drive, a spark that couldn't be taught. Watching you play was one of the greatest joys of my life. It made me believe in something bigger, something brighter, even when things felt impossible. But back then, we were struggling. I was working 2 jobs, trying to keep the house from falling apart, trying to make sure you and Emily had what you needed. Every day felt like a balancing act, and most days I felt like I was failing. When that basketball camp came along, I wanted to send you more than anything. I wanted to give you the chance you deserved. But the money just wasn't there, Logan. I looked at every option, but I couldn't find a way. I made a choice to prioritize survival, our family's survival, and it broke my heart to do it. I know that doesn't make it hurt any less for you. I know it doesn't take away the opportunities you lost. But I hope you can understand that it was never about not believing in you. I believe in you so much it terrified me. I was scared I'd let you down, and in the end, I did, asterisk asterisk. Tom set the pen down for a moment, rubbing his temples. His chest felt tight, the weight of the letter pressing on him. The memories were vivid. The long nights at the warehouse, the mornings spent calculating bills, the ache of knowing that no matter how hard he tried, it was never enough. He picked up the pen again, the words flowing easier now. You've carried so much anger toward me, and I don't blame you for that. But I need you to know that I've carried my own share of guilt. Every time I saw you struggling, every time I heard the disappointment in your voice, I felt like I'd failed you all over again. You were chasing a dream, and I wanted so badly to be the father who could help you reach it. Instead, I became the person who held you back, and I hate that. I hate that I couldn't give you what you needed, what you deserved. But Logan, I need you to know something else. Your dream didn't end because of me. You're stronger than that. You're more resilient than you realize. Maybe I couldn't give you the opportunities you needed back then, but it's not too late for you to chase something new. It's not too late to build a life that makes you proud. I know I have a lot to make up for, and I don't expect forgiveness overnight. But I want you to know that I'm here, for whatever you need, whenever you need it. I love you, son. I always have, and I always will, asterisk asterisk. Tom signed the letter, then sat back in his chair, staring at the words. He wasn't sure if it was enough. How could a letter fix years of pain and misunderstanding? But it was a start. He folded the letter carefully and placed it in an envelope. The next morning, he mailed it, his hands trembling as he dropped it into the mailbox. Days passed with no response. Every time his phone buzzed, he felt a pang of hope, only to find it was someone else. It wasn't until a week later that his phone finally rang. It was Logan. "Dad," Logan said softly, his voice unsteady. "I got your letter." Tom's breath caught. "And?" Logan hesitated, then said, "Can we talk?" In that moment, Tom felt a flicker of hope. The outcome was uncertain, but for the first time in years, the door was open. And that was enough. Tom sat at the same park bench where he and Logan had talked weeks ago. The air was cool, heavy with the scent of freshly fallen leaves. It was quiet except for the occasional sound of children laughing in the distance. In his lap was the letter Logan had sent him, a response he hadn't dared to expect. He ran his fingers over the envelope, hesitating to open it. It had arrived earlier that day, and the weight of it had been pressing on him ever since. Whatever Logan had written, it would either be a beginning or an end. Finally, Tom took a deep breath, unfolded the letter, and began to read. "Dad, I read your letter. Twice, actually. The first time, I was so angry I couldn't even finish it. But something made me pick it up again, and this time I made it to the end, and I cried. I haven't cried in years, but reading your words hit me in a way I wasn't ready for. I think I've spent so much time being mad at you that I didn't leave any room for anything else. It was easier to blame you than to deal with the fact that my dream didn't work out. Blaming you gave me a target, a reason, something to focus on other than my own failures. And yeah, you made mistakes, but so did I. I don't know if I can forgive you yet. Part of me wants to, but part of me is still holding on to everything that happened. I guess forgiveness doesn't happen all at once. It's something you work toward, little by little." Tom paused, swallowing the lump in his throat. The words blurred on the page as tears welled in his eyes. He blinked them away and kept reading. "I want to try, Dad. I want to try to forgive you, and I want to try to forgive myself too. I don't know what that looks like yet, but I'm willing to figure it out if you are. There's something else I need to tell you. After the accident, I started thinking about all the things I've been carrying around. Anger, resentment, regret. It's been weighing me down for so long, and I don't want to carry it anymore. Life's too short to hold on to that kind of pain. I started looking into coaching. Not professionally, just at the rec center downtown. They're looking for volunteers to work with kids. I think I'd like that. Maybe it's not the dream I had when I was 17, but it's something. And for the first time in a long time, I feel okay about that." Tom let out a shaky breath, the weight of Logan's words settling over him. Coaching. He could see it clearly. Logan on the sidelines, encouraging a group of eager kids, passing on the love of the game that had always burned so brightly in him. The letter ended simply. "I'm not sure what happens next, but I think we'll figure it out. Thanks for writing me, Dad. It meant more than I can say. Logan." Tom folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope. He sat in silence for a long time, staring out at the park as the sun dipped lower in the sky. Later that evening, Tom called Logan. "Hey, Logan answered, his tone cautious but not unfriendly. Hey, Tom said, his voice steady. I got your letter. Yeah, Logan said softly. Yeah, Tom replied. I'm proud of you, Logan. For everything. For being honest, for trying to move forward, and for thinking about coaching. You'd be great at it. There was a pause. Then Logan said, Thanks, Dad. Neither of them spoke for a moment. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, though. It was full of unspoken understanding. I'd like to see one of your practices sometime, Tom said finally. Maybe, Logan replied, his voice uncertain but not dismissive. Let's take it one step at a time. Okay, Tom said. One step at a time. They ended the call soon after, and Tom sat alone in his quiet house, staring at the empty space where the basketball hoop used to be in the driveway. He thought about all the years they'd lost, all the things he wished he'd done differently. But for the first time, he also thought about the possibility of what could come next. Would they ever fully repair their relationship? Tom didn't know. Forgiveness wasn't a guarantee, and the wounds they'd inflicted on each other wouldn't heal overnight. But there was hope now, a sliver of it, fragile and tentative but real. The story ends with Tom standing at the edge of the driveway, looking up at the stars. Somewhere out there, Logan was doing the same, both men holding on to the hope that time could bridge the gap between them. The question remains, was forgiveness possible? Or would their past always stand between them? That answer is left to the audience, the unresolved tension reflecting the complexity of family, regret, and the long road toward healing.